Hello again. Welcome to week 3. I apologize for wearing the same sweater, but I've done these first 3 videos on the same day, as you can probably figure. But I promise you for next week I'll wear a different sweater. If it's cold enough. I might even wear a tie. This week you're going to watch some videos on standardized testing. One is going to be by a video of our President, Barack Obama, and his views on standardized testing. I want you to listen closely and see if you can ascertain what he's trying to say about standardized testing as a whole and No Child Left Behind. It's amazing that when we began looking at No Child Left Behind and national high-stakes testing, that we began seeing that maybe standardized testing isn't for everyone. Howard Gardner has a video about standardized testing, and it's on Utopia and Edutopia. Why don't you watch that? I'm not assigning it, but it gives you something to think about. I want to ask you some questions. What do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses of standardized testing? If you think back at all of the standardized tests that you've taken, all of the Scantrons in your educational career that you've filled out, the tests you've taken to become a teacher in the state of California, the CBEST, the CSAT, maybe the old MSAT, but you've taken these tests. Do they have value? Do they really determine your ability to teach? When we began looking at it, what do standardized tests assess? How do we know about assessment? How do we know that what we really are trying to measure is being measured in this very highly developed competitive atmosphere of high-stakes testing? I know of a person who has very bad dyslexia. So bad that he literally is almost functionally illiterate. And yet, if you've ever watched a car show on TV, you've probably seen one of his cars that he's restored completely and painted it, did the interior work, rebuilt all of the components, and put it all back together. He has cars in museums that he has done. And yet, because his dyslexia was so bad, he does not have a high school degree. Now, what do we do about a person like Jim? How do we accommodate for that kind of learning disability? How do we change the standards? Do we change the standards for people like Jim? Do we still hold that person to the same standard? It seems strange to me that in our society we talk about equal access and equal opportunity, and yet we don't take culture very often into account when we're dealing with standardized testing. When my children were little, I was a little bit rebellious, and if they didn't want to go to school the day they were having the STAR testing, I didn't require them to go. Did it hurt them? No. All my children have degrees from major universities, and they're all doing quite well. Did it affect them? No, not really. So when I began asking these kinds of questions, who's the testing for? What is it for? The school? Is it for the teachers? Is it for the district? Is it tied in with the monies that they're going to get from the state and from the federal government? Why? When we began looking at high-stakes testing, and we began requiring someone who has an extreme learning disability to take the same assessment as a person who has 0 learning disabilities and is gifted. Something's wrong there, isn't there? Or if we take a person that's an ESL student and we require that person to to take the same instrument and score at grade level when they may be illiterate in their own language. So when we begin asking these questions, assessment becomes a very, very difficult question. And next week we will, in week 6, we will be dealing with accommodation. How do we deal with accommodation? But right now, I'm trying to think about the kind of questions I would ask you about standardized testing. Maybe you can develop a series of questions about standardized testing, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of it. And maybe you can get into discussions in your group about the strengths and weaknesses of standardized testing. Remember, it's something that we're all required to do, and we'll do it for a long time. And I've done it a long time, and I sometimes worry about myself and about the people I've taught. Was I fair? So I've changed. Things become performance-based rather than standards-based. Thank you. Thanks for taking the class. Bye-bye. See you next week.